Stone. He is a hydrogeology graduate from London University with additional academic qualifications in geology, geography, and education. He has over 35 years of groundwater experience in Africa and the US as a university professor, groundwater consultant, and groundwater advocate and educator. He has first-hand experience of groundwater exploration, well design, and source protection in a wide variety of geologic environments. As the director of the AGWT's education programs, he has convened and coordinated over 100 conference programs related to geothermal technology, well-designed groundwater management, aquifer storage recovery, conjunctive use, water banking, and asset management. In recognition of his work in promoting groundwater resource education in the U.S., he received the 1998 National Groundwater Association Oliver Award for outstanding contributions to the groundwater industry. The American Groundwater Trust is a non-profit education organization with programs that include teacher training and conferences and workshops that focus on the resources, technology, and environmental issues. The AGWT promotes sustainable use and resource protection. AGWT programs provide science-based information to professionals, the public, and decision makers.
Well, I don't know where you were when you said that, but thank you very much. I couldn't have said it better myself, even though I did write it. It's a great pleasure to be here to celebrate World Water Day with all of you. I'd like to make the first observation that, in my belief, every day should be a World Water Day. We cannot restrict something so important to 1/365th of our attention. Let me go through a series of pictures, and I want to share with you some ideas about why we need to protect our groundwater resources and how we can most effectively do that. They've given me 30 minutes. I'd probably need 30 days to really do the job effectively and properly. But let's move forward and let's see if technology can bring on the pictures as I need them. Just a little tiny background about my organization, which is a non-profit education organization. We do a number of different things to help get across the important message about water resources and water protection. As you can see from those pictures, we're concerned with irrigation, agriculture, drinking water quality and supplies. The ecological aspects of water manifest there in this trout stream. We recognize that wetlands are critical to our whole hydrologic system. And then on the other side of the picture there, you see the practical economic aspects of our work, where we need to let people understand the drilling process. How do we access this hidden resource? What are the quality issues involved? How do we treat the water? How do we make sure that it's totally safe? And it all comes down to understanding the geologic environment. Groundwater exists in a geologic environment. Groundwater is part of the hydrologic system. If you want to understand groundwater, you need to have an understanding of geology, and you need to have an understanding of the hydrologic system. It's as simple as that. And if you don't have some basis of understanding how the system works, it's going to be very difficult to make good, solid, intelligent choices about how the resource should be managed. Here is our basic problem. It's a worldwide problem. We have an increasing demand for the resource, and we have a finite, if not diminishing, resource. Just to give you a statistic, or two statistics, the US population is increasing by 7,000 people a day. Every one of those people requires water. They require everything that water provides in terms of energy, clothing, and food. The world population is increasing at 150 people a minute. If you remember nothing else from today, just remember that statistic. 150 people a minute more on this planet, every one of whom requires water and all the goods and services that water can bring. In addition, we have rising expectations as the quality of life and the economies of many third world countries rise. So the demands are going to be huge. The resource is finite. It's renewable, but essentially it's finite. We have to be so smart about how we manage those finite resources. Education is probably the most potent weapon that we have to make sure that those resources are managed intelligently and in a way that is equitable amongst the various citizens of the world. So here are the basic issues outlined very simply. We have not enough resource and we have competition for it. When you have competition, then you have to make decisions about who's going to get it. Those decisions are always political decisions. If our water is being allocated on the basis of politics, we need to make very sure that our politicians have an intelligent understanding of the resource itself. We have a problem, too, of loss of the inventory of our resources. I speak here particularly of the loss of inventory related to groundwater contamination. Once an aquifer is contaminated, its use as a storage vessel for drinking water supply has ended. We are systematically and stupidly reducing the inventory of the worldwide resources of water that we do have. The third thing, of course, is the priorities of allocation. We operate worldwide in many different political situations. There are some instances where the allocation of water is not exactly, shall I say, fair, where the deepest well can win and the little person is left to suffer is probably not a good way to socially engineer our societies anywhere in the country. We have to make sure that allocations are made in the long-term best interests of everybody in a particular city, region, or country. We need to protect and conserve the resources. Now, the strongest reason to protect a resource is because somebody is using it. My organization does not advocate putting water into cold storage. We believe that creatively maximizing the use of water gives everybody the strongest interest in protecting the resources. Then, of course, we need real cost pricing. Worldwide, there is a big problem that we do not pay enough for water. If we don't understand value, we go on price. That is economics 101. It's the most elementary basis of how our financial situations operate. We, and I'm thinking in particular of the people in this room, most of whom have a vested interest in water and a professional interest in water resources, we have to convince the politicians and the public of the incredible value of water. And yet worldwide, people are spending more on cell phones, more on cable television than they do on their water supply and their wastewater disposal. We have things upside down in terms of the priorities we have regarding the allocation of water. We need then real cost pricing. How much does it really cost to deliver the water? It's all very well saying, well, water is free, it comes from Mother Nature, it comes from the clouds. The distribution of that water, the storage and the allocation requires real cost pricing so we can have the adequate infrastructure to engineer the situations to maximize the use. And that brings us to the last point. Who has the authority? Who has the rights? Is it state? Is it local? Is it federal? And how do those 3 or 4 different levels of jurisdiction interact to make sure that we manage our water resources properly? Now, when it comes to education, there are different ways of educating people. The easiest thing is to tell people. And yeah, I'm telling you something. I am like this gentleman in the picture. I'm telling you. But the best way that I can really get through a message is to explain things to you. And when you explain, you start from what people know and you build on that knowledge so that they begin to understand. So explanation is the next step towards education. Then, of course, we need to demonstrate. Things you see and understand firsthand are more real to you than things that you just had explained to you or that were told to you. But most importantly, and what perhaps I'm trying to do today, is to make you disciples of the importance of water. You, more than anybody else in this region or in this country, can be the spokespersons for water molecules. You have the expertise, the knowledge, and the understanding to convey the message in what I can call an inspired way. So you can tell people, you can explain to people, you can demonstrate to people, but what you have to do is inspire people to get involved in water issues that are of great concern to all of us. I'm going to go through some building blocks. I've called them basic building blocks of hydrologic literacy. We need to make sure, in particular our politicians, but because politicians are sensitive to the people who vote for them, we need to explain and understand how the public feels about these things. Here they go. We need to explain that hydrology is integrated. Surface water and groundwater are not separate entities. They are one part of a single unified system. We need people to understand the concept of a water budget. How much in, how much out, how much in storage, how reliable, how frequent. We have to do the math regarding our water resources, and we have to do that in an objective, scientific way. We cannot be optimistic and hope we're going to have more rain than we actually do get. We have to really focus on the fact that water is an economic resource. It is a resource. It's a good. You can look at it in basic economic terms. We have done more harm in water resources by talking somewhat foolishly about water as a basic human right. Water is a basic human need. Whether it's a basic human right is another question. Governments have a top priority to provide for the needs of their citizens. That is part of the connectivity we have between this notion that a water as a basic human right should somehow be free. Nothing is free. Food isn't free. Clothing isn't free. There's no reason that water, while essential to our lives, should be encapsulated in this belief that because it's a right, it should be free. And related to that, I would make the point, there is nothing fundamentally wrong with the private sector being involved in the delivery of water or the treatment of wastewater. If the private sector can run our education systems, run our aeroplanes, run our telephone systems, run our energy systems, what is so fundamentally wrong about the private sector having a hand in the delivery mechanisms for our water supply? Then, of course, we have to recognize that it is an environmental resource. We share water with nature. We cannot and should not turn our backs on the fundamental ecological needs in our country and in our local regions. And if we turn our backs on the ecological requirements, shame on us. South Africa very recently passed some really important legislation where they first of all allocated a reserve. They took the maximum possible of water that was available and allocated a percentage of that water first as a reserve to ecology, second to human drinking water supplies, and down the line with industry coming last in the requirements, in the prioritization of who was going to get the water. We have to recognize the human impacts on water. We have a very detrimental footprint on the quality and the availability of water. I've already talked a little bit about water rights. Who owns the water? That's a critical issue that is going to be bound up with management. Every state, every country has a different twist on who actually owns the water, who has the right to manage it. The jurisdiction of water is a critical element of the politicization that is necessary to get good management decisions. And that brings me, who makes the decisions? Who do you want to make the decisions in your community about who gets water and how much? Who do you want to make the decision about how much of your tax money goes towards water issues? So the hydrology is integrated. Canada understands this, and they put the hydrologic system on their 5-cent coin just to remind their citizens that hydrology is an integrated system. The water budget is absolutely essential. Every one of the arrows you see in this classic diagram of the hydrologic system, you can put a number to. How much water is going where and when? That is how engineers and geologists and scientists make decisions about the allocation of water. We need the good science to put good numbers to those vectors that you see on that diagram. We have to fundamentally recognize that water is an economic resource. It's economic because people are paying for it. It's part of the natural infrastructure that we have in our society. I've already mentioned the importance of ecology. We have to really recognize as a priority that we need to take care of our rivers, our streams, our lakes, and our wetlands in order to have a truly open society that our citizens can enjoy to the maximum. We have to also recognize that we screw things up. We have made our rivers into concrete channels. We have contaminated our landfills with all kinds of junk and put this horrible mess into our aquifers. We have done that. We've done it over the last hundreds of years, but it's continuing. We never seem to learn that you don't mess in your own nest, but we continue to do that. We have to change that as a behavior issue. I mentioned the ownership and the rights of water. I'm not going to dwell on that, but it is critical. Who has the right to the water? Who has the right to make the decisions? And how was that right allocated? Those that give the rights have the authority to take away those rights. If those water rights were not given in good judgment, then the political situation has the authority and the power to modify what was done in the past to make it more relevant to the future. We should not be shy at looking at the needs to get the basis for water management clearly understood. And then who makes the decisions? Who do you want to make the decisions? The citizens, locally? Do you want it made nationally? All of the above? And in which case, who has the prime authority? Who is in charge of water issues around the country? Say a few words now about a water footprint. We tend to think just about water use in terms of putting it on a crop or drinking it or applying it to an industry. But the water footprint concept is growing. And if you look here, we can look at how much you actually use. That's the use of fresh water. How much water has been used to make your product or whatever it may be. And then how much has your product polluted what should be good water? Let's give you an example of a liter of Coke, but I'm not picking on Coca-Cola. I could pick anybody. It only takes about 2 liters of fresh water to make Coke, but it takes 30 liters of water to produce the ingredients that go into Coke, and it takes 24 liters away of blue water in the waste products from the making of Coke. So you can do the math. That's 56 liters of water to make 1 liter of Coke. That's virtual water. That's the embedded water in the product. So when you drink that liter of Coke, you are in effect contributing to the consumption of 56 liters of water. This is critical. This slide is probably one of the biggest dilemmas faced here, right here in Monterey. And that's the value added of water. For a given amount of water, you can maybe grow $100 worth of agricultural products, or you can produce $1 million worth of industrial products. It's very easy, in a strict, tiny economic way, to say, oh, well, we'll give the water to industry. But we have to make sure we don't necessarily allocate the water just where the greatest value is, even though the marketplace is going to determine that agriculture gives way to industry, and that ultimately industry has to give way to human needs. We can also recognize that different crops use different amounts of water. This happens to be in pounds, but the elements are quite there. So if you decide to grow strawberries, you use 33 units of water, but if you grow bananas, you're using 103. So the embedded water is an intrinsic part of commodities and products. We need to bear that in mind when we decide what we're going to grow, where we're going to grow it, and what we're going to do. I turn to the classic hamburger. In its lifetime, a cow will consume 1,300 kilograms of grain, 7,000 kilograms of grass, and it will drink 24 cubic meters of water. A dead cow, I am told, will produce about 189 kilograms of beef, which means that for every kilogram of meat, we have consumed 15,000 liters of water. The embedded water in our products and commodities needs to be part of our debate on how we manage resources. Just for comparison, this is the consumption of water of some various countries. On a per capita basis, this is what we use, not just directly, but also indirectly. So our consumption levels need to be quantified. Our priorities need to be orchestrated in the context of the needs for the environment, and the needs for industry, the needs for agriculture, and the needs for us humans as a direct supply source. So let me go through a few other points. The hydrologic system is global, and it's also, of course, on a continental scale, but it's on a local scale. We know that it occurs as a meteorological origin. The big question for hydrologists is how much, how often, how frequently, how reliable. If we're going to quantify the inputs to the hydrologic system, we need good data upon which to base that. We know that water occurs in a watershed context. The natural topography of the ground is going to dictate where the water moves in general across the surface. It doesn't apply necessarily to groundwater. Groundwater does not necessarily obey surface water characteristics. It has subsurface geometries to take care of. But we need to think of water in a watershed scale. Any impact in a headwater of a stream is going to have an impact downstream. So I come back to this basic picture where the science, engineering, and the ingenuity of people in this room is so critical. You look at any part of the hydrologic system, we need to know, in order to give our politicians and our economists and our financial people the good information, how much water, when is it coming, how good is it, how fast is it going. We have to quantify those. That is the fundamental basis of hydrologic research. We need answers in order to make good decisions. You cannot properly manage your bank accounts unless you know how much you've got in your savings, how much you expect to have in terms of your salary, and how much you need to pay out in terms of your financial commitments. It's an elementary aspect of budgeting. We need to apply those same fundamental rules to how we manage water. We can build dams for storage, and that's useful, except, of course, that it kind of causes all kinds of ecological problems in our streams. But we need to pay far more attention to the potential for groundwater. This is a picture of 200 gallons a minute of water flowing out of a well casing. It happens to be in Georgia, USA, but it could be anywhere. This hidden groundwater, which accounts for 40% of your drinking water supply here, is a critical resource. It's going to become an even more critical resource as groundwater can help us balance and manage our resources in general. If we're looking at the geological aspects of our water supply, there are some fundamental lessons we need to understand about geology. We don't have to be geologists. I'm not looking to everybody to be a rock doctor. What I'm saying is that we need to recognize that there are differences. You see here in this particular image, sedimentary rocks. You see igneous rocks, the igneous intrusion that's moving through those sedimentary rocks. And then each side of that, you can see a little stripe of lighter colored. That's a metamorphic rock, where the igneous rock has cooked up the sedimentary rock. So right here in one picture, you've got the classic igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. They have different chemical characteristics, they have different water-bearing characteristics, they have different storage capacities. So we need to understand what the geology of an area is. In unconsolidated sediments, we know there are fundamental differences, even in short time spaces. We don't just have simply sands somewhere and gravel somewhere else. In many places, they're mixed together, and those characteristics of the sediments will have a huge impact on the characteristics of the aquifer when water resides in those sediments. That will impact how fast it moves, how much is stored, and how vulnerable it may be to contamination. We need to understand the basic differences of our rocks in order to have policies that are going to protect the resources that may be with them. And then the last sort of geologic picture, we know that in cross-section, how the rocks are layered across the Earth's surface can have a huge impact on where the water is stored, where it can be accessed, where we need to drill. So fundamentally then, we need some understanding, and the public needs an understanding, that we're not sitting on a horizontal layer cake of geology with water somehow in a lake underneath. It's a complex geologic environment that's connected with a complex hydrologic environment. People are concerned about drinking water safety. That's number one priority concern of our population. So the question is, what the hell is in the water? We need to inform our citizens of what is in the water, because that is the way in which we measure the index of health risk. What is in the water can very much be related to what we do and how we behave on the surface. You've all seen pictures like this of our trash, our garbage, our rubbish, our dog waste going down the drain. Somebody's waving 5 minutes at me. Thank you. I will try and obey your instructions. This happens to be in California, but those storm drain situations occur everywhere, I'm sure, right here too. We have great problems, perhaps, with wastewater disposal, except they should not be problems. As far as I'm concerned, water is water. There is no such thing as wastewater. We have water in various states of biological and chemical formulation, but none of it should be waste. The potential to reuse, treat, and recharge that water is enormous. We need to spend far more time looking at the technical capabilities of maximizing water, which hitherto we have called waste. It is not waste. Water is water. We have to look at it as one single integrated hydrological whole, not just in the natural system, but also in the engineered system. We have to dispose of trash. This is a landfill in Hollywood. This is the most expensive trash in the world, right at Burbank. But that landfill can produce contamination and leachate. There are landfills that were filled up in Rome 2,000 years ago that are still producing leachate. Just putting stuff in a landfill doesn't get rid of the contamination risk. It just postpones it. We need to look far more at recycling of our landfills. We need to make far more use of getting rid of the trash that we do produce. We have to produce chemicals. This is a picture I usually use talking about perchlorate. Chemicals can have a real adverse impact on the environment. And so too can agricultural chemicals. Just imagine that you are sitting in that pond as a little frog. What are you thinking when you see that airplane come? Think about it. We have a responsibility to those little frogs. We should not subject them to the indignities of aerial contamination like you see in this picture. Okay, I'm coming towards the end. I want to make several points about education, which is really what I'm trying to focus on here. Education is a process, it is not a result. That's an important philosophical point to understand. You have to craft your education to suit a purpose. You have to think what it is you want to achieve in order to orchestrate how you're going to do that. We have to develop around an objective. It is much better, in my belief, to specifically target education with a rifle than it is to blast information in the air and hope some lands on somebody. We need to get messages to politicians. This happens to be the State House in Boston, Massachusetts, where we have 2 drilling machines outside the State House to really remind those elected representatives how critical groundwater is. We need to recognize that public meetings are critically important. The people must have a voice and they must have information. We need to educate our students. Some course on hydrology and water should be absolutely compulsory for every student, irrespective of what discipline they choose to follow. We need to train our teachers about water issues. Our students need to know about water. That's more important than knowing about dinosaurs or Mars or the planets. We need first to make them understand the earth science underneath their feet. And we need to get to children, the decision makers. There's a book that we have just produced for children. This one is What's All That Well Drilling About? The idea is to get a reading book to elementary school students. Start them as young as you can on water issues. So we identify targets, we raise awareness, we frame the issues, we provide information, and you interpret the significance. Interpreting the significance is very important. That's your job. What does it all mean? Now you can read faster than I can talk. I'm going to finish, this is my last slide. The biggest challenge that we have is educating people who think they know. We find many of our politicians who have a cousin with a well think they are God's gift to hydrology. We need to customize targeted education to those key decision makers whose ignorance may be compounded by false knowledge. That is a major challenge for people in this room. So what we need to do is to show people the magic of the subsurface, the critical importance of groundwater to Monterey, to Mexico, and to the world. It's a critical concept that only you can do. Only you, as the foot soldiers of education, can get across as we need it. Thank you.